Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Dibra Maschel Loy Mechayev Ad Oker Leimim Kaimei. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara, so you can see what Tosfos is coming to explain. So here in the Gemara, we presented a teaching from Rav Yehuda that if somebody took a bundle of reeds, Rama v'Zakfe, and he threw it down and lifted it up, Rama v'Zakfe, he threw it down and lifted it up, and that's the way he moved it through the Rosh Hashanah. Rav Yehuda said Loy Mechayev, he's not Chayev, and he concluded by saying Ad Oker Leimim Kaimei, until he lifts it up from its place. So this is the part of the Gemara that Tosfos is coming to talk about and explain. And now let's see the general outline of Tosfos. Rav Yehuda concluded his teaching by saying that a person isn't chayiv unless he does an akira. So there's two parts to Tosfos. Number one, Tosfos will ask that this teaching is obvious. Of course the person is not chayiv since he didn't do an akira. We already know from earlier that one of the parts of the malacha of carrying 4 amas and Rosh Hashanah is that a person needs to do an akira. So this teaching is obvious. Why does Rav Yehuda need to teach it to us? And also why it's brought down over here. How does this teaching belong in our Gemara? And the second part of Tosfos is, Tosfos will point out and explain that specifically in this manner he is pater, but if one drags or rolls an object, he is chayev. So let's see Tosfos now in the flowchart form. So in the Gemara, Rav Yehuda concluded his teaching by saying that a person isn't chayev until he does an akira. So Tosfos asks, number one, what's he coming to teach us? Obviously he isn't chayev since he didn't do an akira. This idea that a person doesn't do an akira, he's not chayev for the malacha, is an obvious teaching. What do we need Rav Yehuda to teach it to us for? And number two, says Tosfos, furthermore, what does this teaching have to do with our Gemara? How does this come up in our discussion? And Tosfos answers both of these questions with one idea, and that is, first he starts off with what the chiddush is. Why did Rav Yehuda need to teach this to us? It's teaching us that even though this is how people carry, since these items are heavy, a bundle of reeds is heavy, and therefore the way to carry it is through Rama v'Zakfe and Rama v'Zakfe. So it's saying that even though this is the way people carry these items, because it's heavy, and it's like oymid lekatif, that's chayiv. We know that if somebody's carrying an object 4 amas and Rosh Hashanah, and after 2 amas he stops to adjust the item, we don't say he stopped and therefore it made an anacha. He rested, the item came to rest, and we separate the carrying into 2 parts. Rather, we say it's looked at as one carrying, because the fact that he stopped in the middle to adjust the item is just part of carrying. So even though over there we say it's part of carrying and therefore it's chayiv, so over here you would think the same thing, since it's the way to carry, therefore the person should be chayiv. Says Rav Yehuda over here, still it's pater. So that's the chiddush, that even though this is the manner of carrying this object, this bundle of reeds, and we know elsewhere that when something is the manner of carrying, we consider it to be chayev, although it would seem to be pater. Over here we would think that the same is true, that although it seems to be pater, the person will be chayev because it's the way of carrying, and that's the chiddush of Rav Yehuda, that still it's pater. And now we can understand how it comes in our Gemara. And since we were talking about the post that the public are mekatfim olav, the Gemara, we started off with a teaching from Ula about a post that's 9 tefachim high, that the rabbi mekatfim olav, people adjust their items on it. That's why it comes in here. Since the idea of mekatfim olav was mentioned by Ula, the Gemara says that although that by mekatfim olav we're not going to consider it to disrupt the malacha and the person will be chayev, we are going to consider over here the fact that the person didn't carry it properly and he will not be chayiv. So that's how it comes in over here. So that's one part of Tosfos. The 2 questions, this teaching is obvious, and how does it come up over here? And the answer, that it's not obvious, since this is the way people carry, you would think that the person should be chayiv, and that's how it comes in over here, because we were talking about something that it's the way people do, that they adjust items on the post. Now Tosfos moves on to the second part. And that is, it's in a purple arrow pointing upwards, because it's a teaching related to what it says in the Gemara. It's an explanation. And he says, and specifically by Rama v'Zakfe, when he throws it down and lifts it up, that when one end is placed outside of 4 amas, the other end is still within 4 amas. Specifically then, when a person throws it, that one end is out of 4 amas, the other end is still within 4 amas, and when he continues and brings the other end also outside of 4 amas, he's still not chayiv. Tosfos points out, so when specifically here, where one end goes outside of 4 amas, but the other end remains within 4 amas, will he be pater? And even when afterwards he lifts it up, the other end now also comes out of 4 amas, he's still not going to be chayiv. And the reason why he still won't be chayiv is because it's like when a person drags an object, so that one end is outside of 4 amas and not the other. If a person dragged an object, so one end left the 4 amas, the other end did not, then that even if afterwards he drags it out completely, he's pater. So if the person broke it up into 2 parts, he dragged one end outside of 4 amas, and he placed the item down, and then he dragged it again, he's not going to be chayiv because he's separated into two things. So too over here, he's not chayiv when he puts the first part outside of 4 amas, only one end is there. And then when he brings out the other end, it's separated into two actions, and they don't combine. So let's see that again, because it's like when a person drags an object so that one end is outside of 4 amas and not the other, that even if afterwards he drags it out completely, he's patur because it wasn't done in one act. So Tosfos now continues and says, but if he drags, he started off saying specifically in this case, that's going to be the din. But if he drags the whole bundle of reeds outside of 4 amas in one act, or from a Rishus HaYachid to a Rishus HaRabim in one act, he is chayiv. So what Tosfos is pointing out over here is that the point is not that he has to actually lift up the bundle of reeds. The point mainly is that it was done in two actions, that the person knocked it over, so only one side went outside of 4 amas. And then when he brought the other side outside of 4 amas, it was a separate action. So therefore they don't combine to be considered chayiv. And it's similar to a person dragging part outside of 4 amas and not the other part. And then he continues and brings out the other part. We're not going to combine the two. However, if a person were to drag the whole bundle of reeds outside of 4 amas in one act, he will be chayiv. So Tosfos is explaining to us that the point over here is not the akira, but rather that it has to be done in one act and not separated into two acts. And now Tosfos proves that if a person dragged the whole bundle of reeds outside of 4 amas without lifting it up, he will still be chayiv. So it's in a light blue arrow pointing upwards because it's a proof to what he just said. Like we say, by one who steals a purse on Shabbos, it says if he dragged it and exited the Rishus HaYachid, he is patur. He's patur to pay back what he stole. So if a person dragged the purse outside of the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim on Shabbos, he's patur to pay back, because the Isur Shabbos and Isur Gneva come together. When he dragged it from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim, two things happened. Number one, he did an Isur Shabbos. And number two, he stole from somebody. And since they came about at the same moment, the din is that when two things were performed in the same act, we say kamle b'derabba mini, which means give the person the greater isser. And between being mechalel Shabbos and stealing, the greater isser is chilul Shabbos, and therefore the person is only chayiv for chilul Shabbos and not chayiv for stealing, and he's not chayiv to return the object. But what we see over here is that although the person dragged it out, he didn't lift it up, he is still chayiv for carrying. So that's what Tosfos is bringing out, that the issue over here is not that he didn't do an akira, but rather that he divided it into two actions. But if you do the whole thing in one action, even without an akira, he would be chayiv, like we see in the example where somebody dragged the purse out from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim. And Tosfos continues and brings another related idea, and says, and says, if one rolls a barrel 4 amas in Rishus HaRabim, so a barrel is round, or from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, he is chayiv because it's like dragging it in that it never rested. Just like when the person dragged it, it's all one action. So too, if he rolled it and it was circular, he will also be chayiv because it never came to rest. Unlike by the bundle of reeds that when he pushed it down, it came to rest. And then there was a separate action done. Tosfos continues and explains, but if one rolls a box that's square, he is patur. Let's take an example, a box that's less obvious that it's in two actions than the bundle of reeds, where it's clearly one action and a separate one, but rather a box that's pushed along and the stoppage is less obvious, says Tosfos. But if one rolls a box that's square, he is patur, because it's like Rom of a Zakfei. Why? In that it's impossible that it won't rest a bit. Even if it's small, but when the person pushes it, even if he pushes it immediately, there was a stop in between. And that's the whole Tosfos. So to summarize, Tosfos began with two questions. He answered the questions like we summarized previously. Then he moved on to a separate point, bringing out that the reason the person's patur is because even if he removes the whole thing, 4 amas or Rishus HaRabim, it's going to be done in two actions. And therefore, it's not going to be combined. But if the person were to do it all in one action, he will be chayiv even if he doesn't actually do an akira. And then he moved on to say that similarly, and he gave an example of that, of dragging the object in one action, brought a proof to it, and said similarly, if somebody rolled it, that's also considered one action because it never came to rest, but that will be specifically if it's round, however not if it's square, because then it will be considered two separate actions and the person won't be chayiv.